The year is 1870. The global economy is fracturing under severe depressions. The working class is confined to disease-ridden, overcrowded slums. And yet, during this exact period of financial collapse, governments worldwide begin transporting millions of tons of premium cut stone into remote, uninhabited forests. They construct palatial, gothic megastructures spanning hundreds of thousands of square feet. Imported marble, slate roofs, intricate masonry. Official history claims these luxury estates were built for the insane. The logistics do not align. The budgets do not exist. Welcome to TitanMetrics. Today we audit the Asylum anomaly. Let us analyze the ledger. To understand the scale of the mathematical deficit, we must first establish the physical parameters of the subject. In the mid-19th century, a new architectural template emerged simultaneously across the United States, Europe, and Australia. It is formally known in America as the Kirkbride Plan. According to the official historical narrative, the psychiatric medical community suddenly adopted a philosophy of moral treatment. They mandated that the mentally ill required sprawling, majestic, palatial environments to heal. We are instructed to believe that 19th century municipal governments, operating on agrarian tax revenues, voluntarily diverted staggering percentages of their state budgets to build luxury castles for the non-productive members of society. Look at the blueprints of these facilities. Consider the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia or the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. These are not hospitals, they are fortresses. The Trans-Allegheny facility alone comprises 242,000 square feet of floor space. The main building spans almost a quarter of a mile in length. It is the second largest hand-cut stone masonry building in the world, surpassed only by the Kremlin in Moscow. Look at the interior specifications: 14-foot ceilings, massive arched windows designed to maximize natural light, hardwood floors, elaborate copper and slate roofing systems, winding, labyrinthine subterranean tunnel networks constructed of perfect red brick. Now compare this to the standard of living for a sane, tax-paying citizen in 1870. The average industrial worker lived in a wooden tenement or a dirt floor shack. Entire families shared a single unventilated room. There was no indoor plumbing. There was no structural grandeur. The state did not provide housing, welfare, or infrastructure for its functional workforce. Yet we are told the state possessed the resources, the will, and the empathy to construct the most magnificent, resource-intensive architecture of the century for outcasts. From a forensic accounting perspective, capital is never deployed in this manner. Governments do not build the Kremlin for the destitute. Unless the buildings were not constructed for the destitute, or they were not constructed by the governments claiming them.
Let us extract the emotion from the historical account and insert the physics of material transport. A defining characteristic of these 19th century asylums is their location. They were intentionally placed in complete isolation. High on hills, deep in dense forests, miles away from urban population centers, and crucially, miles away from early railway infrastructure. How do you move a mountain of stone into the wilderness without a mechanized supply chain? Let us conduct a mass audit on a standard Kirkbride asylum. A megastructure of this volume requires approximately 25 million individual bricks for its interior load-bearing walls, foundations, and tunnel networks. It requires tens of thousands of tons of hand-quarried sandstone or granite for the exterior facade. It requires thousands of massive old-growth timber beams for the roof trusses. In the 1860s and 70s, heavy transport relied exclusively on the draft horse and the wooden wagon. As we established in our previous audits, a standard 19th century heavy cart can transport a maximum payload of 1.5 tons over paved flat ground. But these asylums were not built on paved flat ground. They were built on undeveloped remote topography. The access routes were dirt paths. In the spring and autumn, these paths became deep, impassable trenches of mud. A horse drawing a 1-ton load of granite uphill through mud will experience mechanical failure. The axles will fracture. The animals will collapse. Let us calculate the brick transport alone. 25 million bricks. 500 bricks per wagon load. That requires 50,000 individual flawless cart trips. If the journey from the nearest industrial kiln to the rural building site took just 1 full day round trip, you require an unbroken fleet of hundreds of wagons operating every single day for years. Where are the financial ledgers detailing the purchase and maintenance of this massive equestrian fleet? Where are the records of the thousands of teamsters hired to drive them? Furthermore, consider the physical volume of the building materials. A construction site absorbing 25 million bricks, endless tons of mortar, and heavy stone requires a staging area of immense proportions. The site would be an industrialized war zone of chaotic logistics. Yet the earliest photographs of these asylums frequently show pristine buildings rising out of empty, undisturbed fields with no catastrophic damage to the surrounding landscape and no sprawling networks of supply roads. The logistical footprint required to build these structures in remote isolation simply does not exist in the historical record. We are looking at buildings that mathematically could not have been supplied by the technology of the era in the locations they occupy.
If the logistics are highly improbable, the financial metrics are categorically impossible. Let us audit the macroeconomic environment of the late 19th century. The official construction dates for the largest of these global asylums heavily cluster between 1850 and 1890. This timeline directly intersects with the Panic of 1857, the American Civil War, and the Long Depression triggered by the Panic of 1873. During the Panic of 1873, global markets collapsed. Railroad expansion halted entirely. State governments were deeply in debt or actively defaulting on bonds. Against this backdrop of absolute economic devastation, we are instructed to believe that state legislatures were quietly approving astronomical budgets for psychiatric architecture. The official cost of the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, completed in 1878, was reported as $1.5 million. In 1878 currency, that represents a catastrophic drain on the state treasury. Let us deconstruct that number, $1.5 million in the 1870s. Skilled stonemasons of the era earned approximately $2 to $3 per day. Common laborers earned less than $1 per day. To exhaust a $1.5 million budget entirely on labor, you would need to employ an army of 1,000 men, working 6 days a week for over 5 years. But the budget was not just for labor. It had to cover the procurement of specialized imported slate, hand-carved marble columns, miles of copper flashing, the transportation of millions of tons of raw materials, the engineering of massive self-sustaining subterranean steam heating systems. When you factor in the material costs, the transportation costs, and the geographical isolation, the purchasing power of $1.5 million rapidly disintegrates. To build a megastructure of that complexity today, using modern diesel machinery, laser leveling, and global supply chains would cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
The Victorian budgets provided in the official archives do not cover the actual mass of the materials present on site. Therefore, we must deduce that the accounting is fabricated. You cannot build a quarter-mile-long stone palace in a forest during an economic depression for the reported sums. The ledgers are incomplete. They are incomplete because the states did not purchase the materials, nor did they pay the laborers to lay the stone. They only paid to acquire the land, retrofit the interiors, and file the paperwork.
Let us proceed to the temporal metrics, the variable of time. The official narrative dictates that these colossal structures were erected from groundbreaking to operational status in an average window of 3 to 6 years. We must apply the physics of 19th century masonry to this timeline. The foundations of a Kirkbride asylum consist of solid granite or bluestone blocks. These blocks must be quarried, transported, cut to exact geometric tolerances by hand, and set using rudimentary block and tackle wooden cranes. Once the foundation is set, the brickwork begins. A master bricklayer working a grueling 10-hour shift with a team of tenders supplying him with mortar and materials can lay approximately 1,000 bricks per day. To lay 25 million bricks within a 3-year window, accounting for the freezing winter months when mortar cannot cure and construction must halt, requires a permanent active deployment of over 100 master bricklayers, working simultaneously, flawlessly, every single available day. This calculation assumes 0 supply chain interruptions, 0 labor strikes, 0 inclement weather delays. Furthermore, consider the mortar. Victorian construction utilized lime-based mortar. Lime mortar does not set through a rapid chemical reaction like modern Portland cement. It cures slowly through carbonation, absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. You cannot rapidly stack 4 stories of heavy brick and stone using lime mortar. If you build too high, too fast, the extreme weight of the upper floors will compress and squeeze the wet mortar out of the lower joints. The entire structural wall will deform, buckle, and collapse. The physical laws of lime mortar dictate a strict, slow vertical progression. The building must be allowed to settle and cure before the next massive load is applied. When you cross-reference the required curing times of lime masonry with the staggering vertical height and mass of the asylum walls, the 3 to 6 year official timeline breaks down. You cannot defeat the chemistry of curing stone with cheap labor. The timelines provided by historical archives represent a mathematical anomaly. They reflect the time required to renovate, repurpose, and paint a structure. They do not reflect the time required to build a quarter-mile-long stone megastructure from the soil up.
If the logistics are flawed, the finances are fabricated, and the timelines violate the laws of physics, we are left with only one statistically viable conclusion. The 19th century governments did not construct the asylums. They inherited them. Look at the architectural evidence beneath the soil. A universal feature of the global asylum network is the existence of massive, intricate subterranean tunnel systems. Official history claims these tunnels were built to transport patients in winter or to route steam pipes. Let us analyze these tunnels. They are beautifully vaulted. They feature master-level masonry. They are wide enough to drive modern vehicles through. Why would a cash-starved municipal government struggling to build the asylum above ground expend the massive additional resources required to dig and perfectly line miles of subterranean corridors? You do not place your finest, most durable masonry underground where no one will ever see it. Unless those tunnels were not originally underground. As we documented in Episode 6 regarding the excavation anomaly, the ground level of our realm was drastically altered. The tunnels beneath the asylums perfectly match the architecture of the buried first floors of our major cities. They are the original ground-level corridors of a sprawling, interconnected compound belonging to a previous iteration of civilization. When the post-reset population ventured out of the muddy cities and into the remote wilderness, they found these massive estates standing empty. They belong to the elite of the old world, the administrators of Tartaria, the architects of the impossible scale. The state did not build palaces in the woods. They found palaces in the woods, and they needed a cover story to explain their existence to a newly formed amnesiac population. What is the most efficient way to prevent the general public from exploring a massive, unexplainable architectural complex? You label it a quarantine zone. You declare it a facility for the dangerously insane. You build a wall around the perimeter. You lock the iron gates, and you ensure that normal citizens never, ever cross the threshold.
This brings us to the ultimate function of the asylum, the human variable in our audit. Earlier, we tracked the statistical anomaly of the orphan trains. We documented the systematic redistribution of hundreds of thousands of children across the continents. A manufactured population, clean slates, ready to be programmed with the new, authorized version of history. But an audit of population dynamics demands we ask the subsequent question: what happened to the adults? You can reprogram a child. You cannot easily reprogram an adult who remembers the world before the reset. An adult who remembers how the atmospheric energy grids functioned. An adult who remembers the true names of the cities. An adult who knows that the history books being printed in 1860 are entirely fabricated. What does a newly installed ruling class do with an incompatible demographic holding prohibited memories? You cannot simply execute hundreds of thousands of adults without triggering a mass uprising among the remaining population. You must remove them systematically. You must pathologize their memories. Enter the lunatic asylum. During the exact period that the orphan trains were repopulating the cities, the admission rates to these remote forest megastructures skyrocketed. Let us examine the historical ledgers of admission criteria from the 1860s and 70s. Citizens were committed to these fortresses for absolute absurdities. The archives list causes of admission such as overstudying, political excitement, religious enthusiasm, novel reading, and gathering of wild notions. These are not medical diagnoses. They are ideological compliance violations. If an adult walked into the town square and began speaking about the previous civilization, or questioning why the first floors of the buildings were buried in 10 feet of mud, they were immediately categorized as suffering from delusions or religious excitement. They were seized by the authorities, they were placed on a train, and they were transported to a reclaimed Tartarian palace in the deep woods. Once inside the asylum, the true methodology of the reset was applied. Official medical history admits to the primitive and brutal treatments of the era: electroshock therapy, insulin comas, ice water submersions, and eventually transorbital lobotomies. Analyze the physiological outcome of these procedures. They do not cure disease. They destroy the frontal lobe. They sever the neural pathways associated with complex thought, personality, and most importantly, memory. The psychiatric treatments of the 19th and early 20th centuries were not medical errors. They were highly effective, targeted memory wiping protocols. The asylums were not hospitals. They were processing centers for the ideological remnants of the old world. You gather the incompatible adults in an isolated megastructure. You apply severe neurological trauma until their long-term memory degrades. You reduce them to a docile, vacant state, and they remain locked behind the massive stone walls until their generation simply expires. The orphan trains built the future. The asylums erased the past.
The audit of the 19th century asylum reveals zero structural integrity in the official narrative. The municipal budgets could not afford them. The horse-drawn logistics could not supply them. The curing times of lime mortar could not yield them. They are artifacts, grand estates of a fallen empire, weaponized by the inheritors to imprison the very people who built them. The next time you see a photograph of a sprawling Gothic psychiatric hospital, do not marvel at the alleged compassion of the Victorians. Recognize it for what the metrics prove it to be, a prison designed to hold the truth until everyone who remembered it was gone. Subscribe to TitanMetrics. Our audit of this realm is far from over.